Thank you for joining me. Actually, it's the first today. It's been 9 weeks since you embraced this new challenge as a coach. So what strikes you as the most challenging part and interesting part of the work so far?
Hello. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't really know how to answer that, honestly.
Okay.
I mean, I just try to help the guys, and I guess the challenge sometimes is dealing with 5 pro gamers. You have to be a bit crazy to be a pro gamer, so but it's okay because I'm crazy too, so it kind of works out.
You used to be a pro gamer yourself, so you know what you're talking about, actually.
Yeah, exactly.
But, I know that every team organizes in a different way usually. So can you tell me about the way Fnatic organizes? You have a mix of rising players and experienced players within the same team. So do you, as a coach, have the final word, or is it more of a discussion between you guys?
We try to make it be a discussion. I don't think I've ever been put in that situation yet where I have to make like a really final call about something very important. I think it doesn't really matter if people are experienced or rookies. Everyone has a lot of respect for each other and trust. I'd like to believe so, at least. So there's that. And yeah, I think it's just mostly a team effort. I think everyone just tries to play their part. Sometimes I feel like I'm like a little bit too much of like the guy that is telling people what to do, but we're trying to tune that down. I think like the role I try to have in the team is more of a sixth player that I don't know, that isn't very that is not playing, and it's mostly just like seeing the game from the outside and trying to give them a fresher perspective on something. So that's kind of the role I'm trying to have.
I see, and you managed to do it really well. I mean, Fnatic is locked in playoff and maybe about to take top 2. And I mean, you've been carrying a heavy name, if I may say, because over the years, we often mentioned the expectations and pressure that comes with the orange and black jersey. So how did you manage to work around this and not let it affect you when you do your work?
I've had the luxury of having worn a lot of very important and colorful jerseys along my career. So at this point, I just don't think about it too much. I just appreciate, all the fans that support every team and just League of Legends and let us do what we do and, make a living out of it. So I just go with the flow and try to help whenever way I can.
And you mentioned it yourself, you played for such a long time before role swapping, if I can call it this way. So did you have any expectations when it comes to coaching that turned out to be either false or more complicated than it seemed to begin with?
No, I mean, I think it's, the one thing that I didn't expect is the balance between watching games and playing games. Usually I've been playing for like 8 to 12 hours a day every day in the past, and then having to watch games for like 6 hours and then like not really knowing what to do with my life, because sure, I could do like the usual normal people stuff, going to the gym and taking care of myself, all that stuff, but then at the same time I actually feel like I want to play the game too. So I'm having a hard time balancing myself out, but I think with time it should get better, hopefully. So yeah, we'll see about that. But the luxury is at least I'm playing a lot right now, so I also feel like I really understand like the game at a quite good level. So yeah,
and
I'm confident in what I have to say.
I have a follow-up on that, because you've been playing for so long, and now you have to just you're on stage to draft, and then you have to go backstage and just basically let the magic happen. So how is it being not helpless, but just having to watch backstage when you've been used to playing on stage for so long?
Oh, it's really annoying actually, because I see the whole map, and I also like mostly understand what my players are going through in their thought process and so on. And sometimes I get really pissed off that they don't see any of that. So yeah, it's quite a frustrating feeling. At first it was just nerve-wracking, but now it's just getting more and more frustrating.
I mean, given the result, they must be doing pretty well. I mean, is there anything you would like to say to your players, actually? Some praise? I know that Wipo is waiting for the post-game lobby, so anything you want to say to them?
No, they're doing great, of course. You know, it's just like the feeling of being backstage and not really having any chance to influence the game that's making me frustrated. Not like that they're playing bad or anything that, you know.
I mean that.
Yeah, no, like the guys are doing great and they're putting even extra effort for playoffs, and we can, like, I can really feel that. You know, we've been having the trouble of having to practice online and all that. So, you know, it's kind of hard sometimes to get the point across and work through the internet without having the empathy of face-to-face communication. So, yeah, we've been trying to work around that, and I think everyone is putting in the extra work. So, really appreciate that.
Berlin internet not helpful lately, but I hope things can get better for the playoffs. Before sending it to PGL, I want to have your input on something. The broadcast will talk about who should be the spring MVP here. So who should get it?
The spring MVP?
Yeah. You can name 3 players. Make it easier, maybe.
No, I'll name Buipo. I think he should get it from our team. I think he's done a great job this split.
Buipo, well, let's see what he has to say. Take it away, Jacques. Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Oh, well, I guess we're already here. Hello. Welcome, everyone, to the LEC postgame lobby, the online edition. I'm Shax, and I'm joined here by VODS and by, I think, the person who, if we don't have cameras, has the most expressive voice, next to also having a very expressive demeanor. Wipo, welcome. He might not be there yet because he was sharing the headset with, I believe, Mithy, and, you know, maybe in Fnatic House they don't have that many headsets, and so, like, who knows what's happening. I mean, it has to be
Shocks, it's very common, you know, they've got to get from their gaming chairs to the interview lounge, like, it happens in the studio all the time. We're just kind of recreating that feeling, you know, so we can just chat about what a pretty crazy game that we just saw. I thought it was close up until it wasn't. It was one of those situations where I'm looking at Mad, I'm like, okay, Mad, this is actually pretty solid. Like, you've punished a couple of small mistakes from Fnatic. This is looking good, but then it just got to a point where every play that they tried to make, Fnatic was consistently outplaying them. And I'm glad we have Wipo here because he was one of the big playmakers in this game for me. He was someone that...
Here?
I'm here.
Yay! Hi!
Welcome, Wipo. It's great to have you. You can talk a little bit about
it's great to be here. About last game?
Yeah, that one.
I feel like last game was a bit clunky. Like from our end, it was like some plays were kind of fortunate in the early game. I think that, for example, Mad Lions had an opportunity to look on our bot lane for a dive before we quite got there, and I got, you know, I wasn't sure what was going on, so I TP'd early to make sure that if they went for a dive, I could punish. Didn't quite work out. Tried to make the most out of my TP anyway, and failed miserably. That said, the Herald play as well, Aatrox TPing in, Selfmade making a clutch play, cleaning up the MF before dying, picking up the Herald anyway. Like, these kind of plays can go way worse, right? Like, Selfmade could have just died, they could have taken the Herald from him when it was low HP, and all of a sudden this game looks a lot difficult. From our perspective as a team, we didn't actually feel like it, because of these early game mistakes. Once the ball got rolling, we managed to take team fights quite handily.
I'd love to know what you think about Mad, if you can form an opinion, because we've had a bit of a discussion about who we think under the top 3 could have like the most ability to upset or have a really good run in the playoffs, and then we thought maybe it could be Mad, but I'd love to know what you think.
It's kind of difficult to say because I feel like most of these teams are very... I mean, right now, especially in weeks 8 and 9, I feel like when I'm watching other teams play, I feel like a lot of the players are choking. And I know it's a term that's very overused, but the way I like to look at it is that there's a lot of pressure on these players, and they're making decisions that, you know, they're going in times where it feels a bit too forced, and they're not taking fights that you feel like you would usually see them take and end up winning. And I think that makes it very difficult to say the gauge, the real strength of all the teams coming into playoffs. Because I feel like a lot of the teams where you can reliably say that they're going to make a big play or they're good at taking over games through certain ways, just, it isn't really showing. And I think that the strengths of a lot of teams, like Rogue, for example, I think Misfits as well as Mad, like all their strengths, they're kind of watering out, I guess. Like you can't really tell in the games that they're winning what's making them win, and in the games that they're losing, it just doesn't feel like they have much life at all.
Okay, I mean, that's fair. I think also there's something to be said for the fact that teams like Fnatic and like G2 are ramping up towards the playoffs. As we button up this game, the key up player of the game, to my surprise, Bippo, is Hylissang. With
No, I don't think I was surprised at all. I think he played very well.
No, but I mean that people voted for the support.
I mean, I'm happy they did. Like he deserves it. He played really well today. I think it was probably one of the best games of the split for him. Like it's probably one of his best. It's a classic on his Rakan, of course.
Yeah.
The Drake fight, I think, set the pace of the game. The one where he ended up charming 4 people, knocking up 2 or 3. I think that really set the pace of the game, and we were able to take over from that fight. So I'm happy to see that he actually got the MVP for that.
Yeah, just to be clear, no shade from my side. It's just that support sometimes have a very hard time of getting votes.
It's true.
But Hilly won. Yeah, there we go. So, Whipple, now we want to take you into what could be a very interesting discussion. As you know, the MVP voting is on the horizon. It will happen after week 9, and we wanted to take a look at some candidates. Now, Mithy already nominated you, and I'm going to let Andy talk first and then let you answer. As to yourself, Whippo, as an MVP candidate, what are your chances? And how much do you think you deserve it? But I'll let you think about it. Andy, do you think Whippo deserves it?
Well, he's one of my candidates. From Fnatic, I thought a lot about who I would want to put on there, and I think, honestly, Bwipo has had a fantastic split overall. Not only in terms of, admittedly, at the beginning of the split, his laning phase was a little, debatable, but I think that he's ramped up pretty dramatically throughout the split. But what's impressed me the most is how much impact he's had on the map. And the Zac game was really the game that really stood out to me, where he was struggling in lane, at least it looked like it on paper, but then he went from that to consistently finding good engages, to roaming around the map, to peeling for his teammates, and you saw it on plays like Set with the Pantheon. We did get to see a couple of good Rengar games from him as well, and I feel like not only has he demonstrated a wide depth of champion pool, but he has been impacting the whole map very consistently, especially in the second half of the split, and for a top laner to do that, I think is very challenging. So he's definitely one of my candidates for MVP of the split.
Wow, high praise, Whippo.
Wow, I can't really. I think my split's been pretty solid. I think in general, I feel like as a team, the games that we win, they feel very good. I think most of the games is like 1 or 2 mistakes that we're looking at and are like, this is easily fixable. And that gives a lot of confidence for me and to play my game. And in general, I think for the whole team, in the sense of, when we look good, we look really good. And I think that's like one of the biggest confidence boosts for our whole team. So for me, I mean, being MVP or not, it's not really a conversation I've ever thought of, because there was always Reckless or Caps or whoever that I'm like, even if I got close, these guys are probably getting, Reckless is probably getting it over me, or in 2018, Caps is probably getting it over me anyway. So, it's not really a conversation I like to think about too much. If I get it, I'd be really happy. But in general, right now, I just want to do what my team needs me to do to win. And if that's good enough, then that's good enough.
Okay, well, I can follow that. I also think it's one of those tricky ones, because you can be so damn good, but there are a lot of good players in Europe. I mean, and especially with a G2 around, and I think we talked a lot about Jankos and Perks, for instance. Can you follow that line of thinking in terms of possible MVPs?
For sure. I mean, I think G2 in general has looked like they're a solid team. I think that in general, they've looked, it's been a little bit different for them because they had a lot of the Enchanter support top lane play style. That's obviously a style where they're going to look a little bit worse in the early game because you don't actually have a top laner that's without pressure or anything like that. So it's a very different dynamic, and it has an impact on the rest of the team as well, right? I believe they played 5 games or so with that. So that obviously puts a dent in the rest of the team's performance, because the enemy top laner can roam mid. The enemy top laner has a lot more pressure topside, so he can invade. The enemy jungle can invade Jankos' jungle more often and whatnot, right? So, all things considered, I think their mid jungle has played very well at times. But I also feel like, at least early on in the split, you could definitely tell that there was some lack of synergy between Perks and Jankos. That said, now moving forward, I think they've fixed that and they look pretty solid. They've had both really good individual performances. Jankos on the Pantheon, for example, I believe last week he played 2 very strong games on that, and then even today, Perks and Zakali looked very clean.
Yeah, indeed, and I think it's very hard to put anything against that, but you are right that when you have to think about how they're playing now, but if you take everything into account, maybe you could make a case for other players, but Perks and Jankos, and I think just the sole fact that Perks has never won an MVP, which we talked about already, is just crazy, and I think that speaks to the fact that you, for instance, are having one of the best splits you ever had, but that's not always enough.
Of course, like, it's a competition, right? Like, you're competing in the LEC, you're always going to try to be the best, but it's very hard to be the undisputed number one, right? That's why the MVP voting always has multiple candidates, and it's very hard to be like, okay, this is the guy that made the most difference, hands down, and that's why it's an interesting conversation, because everyone can add to their opinion, their look on the game, like, what is this guy doing that other people aren't, and in these type of questions is all things you add up into the conversation about being MVP, because there's always the hypothetical of, is it the best player on the worst team, or is it the best player on the best team, right?
And I love that point, because when we think about certain, like Odoamne is a great example of someone that I think really shone on a team that was really struggling, and would he ever be in consideration for MVP, right? When you think about what he tried to do and the impact that he had on his team, it's a very difficult conversation to have because the team isn't winning. But what I think is really fascinating is someone we put at the mid-split was Alfari, and we recognized him as having a very fantastic first half, but then in the second half a little bit shaky. But then at the same time, he fills this role on Origin of pretty much doing anything that his team needs, very similar to Bwipo, but I think that the way in which they impact the map is quite different. So I'm curious as to what you think, Bwipo, in terms of, would Alfari be someone that you consider MVP worthy based on his split as a whole?
As a split as a whole, I mean, it's very difficult to say. The thing about like MVP for me is, like, I like a player that makes the team that helps the team thrive outside of their comfort zone. I think that's a huge deal for an MVP player, in my eyes at least, in the idea that Origin's a very slow team. So for me, to really see an MVP candidate in OG, I would need that player to be someone that can make the game fast. That will make him really shine out to me. What?
You want OG. You just
I don't know. This is the thing. I don't know if I would be able to speed the game. And of course, you know, you don't want a player that's speeding the game up backwards and your Nexus is exploding faster. That could happen if I would play on OG, of course. But you get my point, right? Is that you do, like, I think that's like what makes a team interesting, you know? I think Fnatic as a team, I think most people would be like, the bottom lane, Reckless, Hylissang, Selfmade and Nemesis, synergy, right? So to have a top laner that, like, actually stands out a little bit is something that people will look at, right? Because it's like, oh, well, their top laner is doing something. That's great, right?
Yeah.
Finally, before we move on from the MVP one, is there anyone we didn't mention that you would like to mention, Bwipo?
It's hard to say. Like, it's hard not to be toxic, of course. Like, you know, like, a lot of my teammates played very well the split. I don't know if they deserve MVP or not, because it's very difficult for a player. Like, when I see my own teammates play, it's like someone has to be so much better than the rest that I would notice that they should get MVP, if that makes any sense. Like, that's why I think if you ask any of my teammates, it's not like anyone's going to be like, oh, this guy is, like, really shining. Because I think all my teammates are playing very, very well this split, and I'm just very happy in general with the performance of our team.
Yeah,
that said, trying to think.
Well, the thing is, it could just be this clear cut, right? Because I think in the middle of the split, we had a lot of, Febiven's playing out of his mind, but then Misfits dropped off a bit. So I think if you say Bwipo, Perks, Jankos, I think you're doing a pretty good job. Of course, at LEC, if you want to flame us, no worries there.
I think that's a pretty solid round, I guess. I mean, I'm still surprised I'm there, but yeah. Reckless has had a really solid split. That is true. He has played very, very solid. I think that if you're looking at value from an idea of, like, can't go wrong, he is probably the most valuable player in Europe, right? You can't go wrong with having him. And I think that is one way of looking at most valuable, right?
Yeah, no,
it's
true.
definitely true.
Well, contentious topic, but I think, we've got some good names here. Let's move on to the standings. Important updates. G2, they have secured the first seed in the spring playoffs. The battle for fourth, though, it is still wide open. Yeah, is that a little bit of a rain on your parade that you couldn't lock in first place, Whippo?
Not immediately. I mean, in general, unless G2 tries to be cheeky and picks us if we end up third, I don't think there would be a world where we would pick them if we got first and they got third for any reason. I mean, maybe we would for like mental advantage and all these things, you know. Teams like to think about that stuff. People like to talk about that and whatnot. But I think it's fairly clear cut that one of us is going to play OG and the other one is going to play fourth place, and that's just the way it's going to go. Again, if G2 wants to challenge us in case we get third place and go for the banger straight off the bat, then I'm down. But I think realistically speaking, we're both going to play a best of 5, and then based on the outcome, we're going to see each other. That's what I'm assuming. Of course, there could be upsets. That's what's interesting. That's what I like about this format, right? It's like even if we get upset or G2 get upset, we could still meet in the finals, right? And that's really awesome about the new format. That said, like I said, it doesn't really change much in the sense that unless G2 picks us, it doesn't make a difference.
I love how you look at it. It's like, oh, we'll still make it to the final anyway, and like all the lower place teams are like, yes, we have more chances to beat, to upset them. You're like, no, we're gonna.
That's just what I expect. That's what I expect. I do expect the G2 Fnatic final. I could be wrong, but I feel like all things considered, from what I've seen from a whole split so far, 17 games, I think that's quite enough to have an idea at least. And the way I feel playing against teams, especially online as well, right, is that in general, we're the most resilient teams, and I think resilience is something that definitely comes into play when you start playing several best of 5s. And with a losers bracket introduced, you can't just lose your best of 5, you know, like I don't know who's going to hit top 4, but let's say one of the newer teams hits top 4, they lose their first best of 5, and then, you know, they tilt. You know, I know people like using that word, but you get the point, right? And that type of resilience is something I think G2 has shown several times. Even in 2018 summer, when they ended up going to Worlds, it was something that nobody actually expected from them, right? And in 2019, there were several best of 5s. I was on the receiving end of that resilience at some point. They ended up crawling back to a victory, and I think that that's very important when you're looking at a playoffs format as a whole. And I think Fnatic as a team, we also bring that resilience to the table, and it'll be very hard to get rid of us in the format like that.
Yeah, I think that's a very apt observation. We'll see how those playoffs play out. As said, in terms of that top 4, it's still between Rogue, Misfits, and Mad Lions, but Mad Lions are the only team that have the destiny in their own hands. If they win tomorrow, that means they are that 4th place. Let's take a look at the schedule to see who they are playing tomorrow. I don't remember from the top of my head.
G2, so I believe, no? Mad Lions?
See, it's not easy, so that's what's in my head. Yeah, it's Origin,
It's Misfits.
actually.
Oh,
It's Origin.
Oh.
Third time's the charm. Hey,
All right, there we go.
I'd be pretty optimistic if I was a Mad Lions fan. If there's anyone out of the top 3 you'd want to play, I guess you'd want to play OG, no?
I'm not sure. Like, you'd have to ask them. I mean, they just asked us, so I don't think they want a rematch, do they?
So the thing is, right, the thing about playing G2 and Fnatic is that I think that both those teams are more willing to take risks, and as a result, there are closer windows of opportunity where you can take advantage of them, even though on paper Fnatic and G2 should have better players. But the problem with playing against Origin is you have to adapt a playstyle that is like Fnatic and G2, where you're willing to push Origin outside their comfort zone. So first you have to meet the quality bar of their players, and then you have to be willing to push them outside of what they like to do. And if you can't do that, then they're very difficult to play against, which is why I think Origin does so well against teams below them. And I think that Mad will struggle more against Origin just because of the nature of their playstyles and how they interact than they necessarily would against a Fnatic and a G2.
Okay. Well, final question for Bippo before we let him go. I know we've been talking for a while, so it's Misfits versus G2. That's our match of the week. That's not necessarily what I want to talk about. Did you see the Kalista top today? And what did you think?
Oh, I didn't. I saw him play it, and I didn't see the early game though, so I can't really speak for that. Yeah, he was 60 CSO. I mean, I think that's like a given. Like that's necessary for this champion to work top lane. I think it's a given. Like I don't think there's any champion really in the game. I think there's like one champion in the game I can think of that can match Kalista early game. And if you're not willing to play that, it's really tough. So it's just a champion that I feel like he reminds me of Jace. Kalista reminds me of Jace in the sense that if you're willing to pick this champion and you're willing to commit resources to it, then you really don't want to play against that. You know, like if you're playing against a team that wants to do that, you're just like, you know, as a top laner, I know I'm like, it's not like by any means that the game is lost if she has a 100 CS lead or anything like that, because it's not a champion that completely takes over team fights or anything like that, right? Like they actually have to play a good macro game from start to finish when you lock in that champion. So for me, Kalista in playoffs is mostly a champion that's like, people busted out game one, and if it works, enemy team will probably end up banning it, and if it doesn't, then you're 0-1 down, and you're like, well, at least we tried.
Sounds like G2 will do it 2 games in a row and lose against you guys and then turn it around. Oh, sorry.
Maybe something like that. I mean, it could work. I'm just saying, like, it's a champion that, like, it's very much like Jace. It's something that, in a best of one, you probably just want to remove, because if the enemy team, like, if the stars align, they play very well around it. The pressure's too much. You don't find any openings to get kills, because I think that's their biggest weakness as a champion, is she's relatively immobile. In the idea that if you have some hard CC, some point and clickers, some Maokai's, Ornn-esque champions, it's pretty hard for her to do anything. However, if she doesn't actually end up getting locked down, it's very easy for her to take over a game and just be very strong in every fight coming up.
Okay, pretty nuanced opinion, not just pick Kalista, win the lane. Thank you so much, Bwipo. We'll be looking forward to your last game tomorrow, and then, of course, Fnatic in the playoffs. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave you be for now. We're going to say goodbye to everyone at home. Fear not, we will be back tomorrow for the last day of the regular season. We'll see you then. Goodbye.
Bye.